Welcome to The Snap with Alexis Perry and Sydney Jones.
Hello, everyone, and happy Friday. Welcome back to the Broncos Podcast Network and YouTube for the latest edition of The Snap. I'm your host, Sydney Jones, joined as always by Alexis Perry. With less than a week left until the 2021 NFL Draft, we have a jam-packed show planned for you all today with two very special guests, NFL Network analytics expert Cynthia Frelund and senior writer for The Athletic, Lindsay Jones. They're both joining us today to help us break down this year's draft class and give some insight into who they think the Broncos will select at 9th overall. We are joined first today by Cynthia Frelund, who's going to tell us a little bit about her analytics-based mock draft. Cynthia, thanks for joining us here on The Snap again. How have you been?
I'm great. Thank you. I'm so excited for the draft. We're finally here. We've been talking about it forever and ever and ever. We're almost here. We've almost made it.
Well, Cynthia, before we delve even deeper into the draft, first, we discussed your analytic-based mock drafts the last time you joined us here on The Snap. But for those who might have missed that episode, remind us of how you create this model-based mock.
Yeah. So basically what I'm looking at is I'm not allowed to make any trades because my editor would kill me. But in a world with no trades, then who would add the most value to each team in this particular season? So, or it's just a theoretical exercise, because then people's strategies, like a team could look at something like this, an analysis like this, and then they could layer in their own strategy. Perhaps they want to pick a quarterback for the future. Perhaps they want to, they have different agendas, right? They're not looking at just things in a vacuum. But since I'm looking at it for all 32 teams, we had to kind of create a level playing field. I don't have everyone's cap information. I don't know, necessarily what someone's plans are on one of these marquee positions for next season that's very expensive. So I just make it, okay, let's go with just one season at a time instead of multiple seasons, and who would add the most value in this particular season.
So let's dive into some of your mock drafts. You have released two different versions so far since the last time we've talked. So who do you have the Broncos selecting at 9th overall?
So if they're not allowed to move anywhere, there's kind of two that become more interesting. The first is we're seeing some places where, so another model that you're not seeing is one that percentage chance of a player being available in each position. It is not published anywhere, but it's something I've been working really hard on. We talk about it on TV. I'm just not a front end developer, so I can't post it everywhere. So ultimately it's, if we are seeing 4 quarterbacks go in positions 1 through 4, then it would be interesting, because that would likely mean it's not going to be, the 5th quarterback is probably not the best selection for the Broncos, but it could mean that someone like a Micah Parsons, who fits very well with what we've seen your head coach be able to execute year in and year out. It's a Vic Fangio type situation with a Micah Parsons, for example. That would add a lot of value despite not being on the offensive side of the ball, which is where presumably more value could be added for this one particular season. But Micah Parsons would be an interesting fit there, just schematically really fits what Coach Fangio has executed so well year in and year out.
Okay, correct me if I'm wrong on this, but I'm pretty sure you've told us the model that you create for these mock drafts, they also predict how maybe the highest win total for each team in 2021 and how a player could help factor into that. Am I right?
Perfect.
Okay. That was perfect. Just want to double check on that. So
yeah.
How many more wins? I just have to ask for Broncos country. How many more wins did your analytics predict that Justin Fields would add for the Denver Broncos?
I'm going to tell you something. My models love Justin Fields. In fact, in many metrics, Justin Fields actually has some greater indications for success at the next level, given the right fit, than that guy who's the presumptive number 1. I'm not suggesting, I'm not saying he's not good. I'm not saying anything bad about Trevor Lawrence. I'm just saying that there's some, depending on fit and the potential with the mix with the blend of other teammates, then you could get a higher uptick for a guy like Justin Fields, who has some different indicators for success than other guys. So the interesting part about Fields for me is that he would have added, so if somehow Fields ends up as a Bronco, then the ability to add wins, I think it was it was a good number. It was around the 4 number, which is, it sounds weird to say 4 wins added, but the best quarterbacks when we still had a 15 season or 16 game and 15. So for rookies, I look at 15 games just because the first game we kind of throw out the number. They get kind of one do-over, right? So if you look at that for 16 games, 5.5 wins is kind of that's like a Patrick Mahomes level type thing. So that they kind of extrapolate that up to about 6 wins in the 17 game format. But then you look at rookies, a number somewhere like, somewhere between 3.5 and 4.5 would be really, really good. And I think Fields to the Broncos was right around like 4-1, like right around there for that 17 game season. It was a really nice number.
What are some of the traits about Justin Fields that you think would make him such a great fit here for the Denver Broncos?
Yeah. So his ability to throw on the run is really helpful for a lot of the way modern quarterbacks play, right? You see these guys, you saw the difference this season when Josh Allen was able to execute his throws on the run with a really good, like when he got his base more set and he wasn't kind of throwing it without reading the defense, he was able to learn and be taught in that way. Part of that comes from having the right blends of running backs and the right blends of pass catchers, wide receivers in their case. But see, for the Broncos, that means also a tight end, because your tight end is a pass catcher too. So it means the right blends of people around you to create that. The fact that the O-line is way better in run protection than pass protection, given the projections that I'm seeing of who's playing on that O-line right now, means that a guy like Fields, who's a great runner and good on the run, and he gets set, he has that natural ability to set his hips and throw off platform with more accuracy than other quarterbacks. That is a high indicator for success, especially when you get, the Jerry Judys of the world, you get Cortland Sutton back. You're in a good shape with these pass catchers and you have a really strong running back core. That means more success because you have variability. Like, what are you going to do? You're going to run? I don't know. Are you going to pass? I don't know. Play action? Let's go. That kind of thing.
I think I saw in one of your mock drafts on NFL.com, you had us selecting Justin Fields, but you also mentioned Michigan tackle Jalen Mayfield and Tulsa linebacker Zavin Collins. What did you like about those guys? Why did you mention them as well?
I think that tackle's a position my models do not like very much. And so I think that the ability to replace along that right side could be very helpful. Mm-hmm. And that means the opportunity for whoever the quarterback is to have more time. It sounds weird to be like 0.6 seconds. That's a monstrous amount of time when it comes to potentially throwing a football, especially as an average, right? So if you give a little bit more time, the success ratio goes up significantly. So Jalen Mayfield, his ability to add on that side of the line is really helpful and projects well for the Broncos, especially when you gotta realize that your division, it's an interesting one because, we didn't see the Kansas City Chiefs. They didn't blitz a ton last season, but I'm sure that they'll figure it out. Spagnuolo is going to figure out a game plan for the right sets of situations, and he's going to attack where he thinks some weaknesses are. So if you fortify that O-line, you're going to be in a better shape against the Chiefs, which is, let's be honest, you got the Chiefs, you got the Chargers, like Joey Bosa is coming for you, like, okay, let's make that better. Let's fix that one a little bit too. So, these are things that you need to take into consideration. And then of course, when I look at Collins, he's not dissimilar from Micah Parsons in terms of kind of what the functionality might be and how that might fit. But I don't think he's a first rounder. He'll be, to me, he'll probably fall into the second round, which would be an awesome fit and a great value. Because in a different season, maybe different needs and different things, he could have been a first rounder.
Cynthia, I also saw a separate article that you wrote about the best team fits for this year's top quarterbacks. And in that article, you wrote that the Broncos would be the best fit for Alabama quarterback Mac Jones. Why did you think that?
It just the way the math worked. It wasn't that, Mac Jones, really what that says is that upgrading the quarterback position, because there's the Broncos have a lot of strengths in a lot of positions. The quarterback position is one that needs to be solved for because it's the most important position in all of sports. So it just shows where he could be useful. He's super accurate. Mac Jones, he's shown he wasn't asked to do a ton of different things. He stood behind a really good O-line. He had nasty running backs. He had 2 presumptive first round wide receivers he was throwing to. So he was in a great situation, which means it's kind of a compliment to the Broncos situation because you have great you got Jerry Jeudy that they know each other, like, you've got this situation, and then, Cortland Sutton back, like I said, and you've got great running back. So it kind of is more of a mirror situation to what could happen quickly and the uptick quickly. But again, quarterback's a position that you have to really think about for the long haul. It's not, that's a style thing. And it just so happened. It's kind of a compliment to the other aspects of the Broncos system that he ranks so highly, despite not even being the best fit for the Broncos.
Well, Cynthia, you wrote in one of your mocks that Denver is an interesting spot with the opportunity to trade up or down depending on their strategy. You mentioned that your mocks don't allow trades, but if they did, would you keep the Denver Broncos at number 9, or would you think that they would trade up or down?
9's an interesting one. If I were the Broncos, I would tell everyone that I would tell every beat writer on the planet that I'm listening to offers to trade down, because whatever. And I would just tell everyone, like, I'm open to everything. I've got all these great options, because you don't really need anything that so desperately that you have to sell the farm to get it. And you don't really not need things so much that, like, you'd accept a trade that wasn't good enough. So I would field all trade offers for sure. I would potentially see, I don't know if the Falcons really want to draft a quarterback or not, but if it's not going to be the guy that they want, because we know, look, let's do the investigation game, right? Like, we know one is going to take a quarterback, right? Pretty sure. It'd be shocking if it wasn't Trevor Lawrence, but okay. We know 2, they're not, they're going to take a quarterback. You know why we know that? Because 3, they traded up in order to get to 3, because, and remember that Robert Saleh came from Niners. If you don't think they know what each other are doing, nothing illegal, nothing shady happened, but I used to work for ESPN. I can still tell you some things about ESPN, and I haven't worked there in 5 years. So, you just know these things, right? So it's like, okay, well, if our guy isn't really there at 4, we don't need to reach up and get him, because hey, we've got options. And by the way, it's likely maybe like a Jimmy Garoppolo will be available on the market after, trade market after. So you don't even know, like that. So to me, I think the Broncos are in great shape. They could, maybe the Eagles try to do something weird. You never know. They've been saying a lot of weird things over there. There's a lot of rock, paper, scissors coming out of them. And ultimately, I would just say, I'm open to anything. I'm listening to everything. I don't need you. I could take all of these different positions and get better. Like, call me, maybe.
George Payton, he's in a great position right now. I love it.
Great position.
And he even said in his pre-draft press conference on Thursday that, he hasn't called anyone to trade down or trade up yet, but people have called him about trading down. So he is in a good position.
They're in a great position. You could go, like, who do they like? Like, I would imagine their draft board has like a couple of different options, and all of them are great. Like, all of them are great. So great. You could be in a space where you get a sick offensive tackle and maybe even a corner, because this is a deep corner class. With your first, and how much great, like, you'd be in great shape. You don't need to reach for anything. Like, it's a nice, it's like, you don't need to be desperate, worried about your homecoming date. You've got 5 options. You could, any date you want, you're good.
Well, you guys hear that, Broncos country? We're good. We can have any date we want.
Any date you want.
Wait and see. Well, Cynthia, I always love hearing about your mock drafts. They seriously blow my mind. You're incredibly intelligent. So thank you so much for joining us here again. It's always a pleasure chatting with you.
Yeah, have fun. Enjoy.
And guys, make sure to look at her mock drafts on NFL.com/Frelund, right? Mm-hmm. And follow her on Twitter. Her handle is @CFrelund. Thank you, Cynthia. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
And our next guest for today's show is Lindsay Jones, senior writer for The Athletic. Lindsay, thanks so much for joining us again here on The Snap. How have you been?
I've been really good. I'm very excited that we're finally in the last few days before the draft. This is kind of the weirdest time of year where you just never know what to believe. But it's been a fun draft process, but I'm really ready for it to be here and get over with.
We are too. I know we're counting down the days, less than a week away. The Broncos have so many options this year. How do you see the first round playing out for Denver? You think we'll trade up, back, stay at 9? What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, well, I think the Broncos are in such an interesting position where they're very much one of the biggest wild cards in this draft, where they sit in an enviable spot there at number 9, still in the top 10, which, is a place that teams might want to move into. At 9, they're going to have a ton of options, I think, available, but mostly it's just going to be so wild to see how the board falls in front, leading up to 9, because I don't think it's any secret that the Broncos have been in the quarterback market. So is there a guy that they love enough that they're willing to move up for based on what's happening with the board, the way that things are going around, picks 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, that, that George Paton's going to want to move? Or does George just sit there and say, all right, I'm going to take the best defensive player on the board because all of them might still be there at 9? I just think that the Broncos are now one of the most interesting teams in the draft because, like you said, so many options and also a whole lot of needs.
Okay, so we're not really sure exactly what they're going to do, but hypothetically they stay put. Who is somebody that you think would probably be there at 9?
Well, it's like, it's a lot of hypotheticals, right? Because we go through all of the different mock draft scenarios, and that's what's, kind of fun this time of year is because there's a million simulators out there where you can try to figure out. Yep. I do think there's a good chance that when they're there at 9, either Justin Fields or Trey Lance might be there. I mean, we got to see what the Niners are going to do. The Niners are going to dictate the rest of what happens in that, in the top half of that first round, depending on what they do at 3. If they take Mac Jones, if they take Justin Fields, if they take Trey Lance, then what are the Falcons going to do? But I think there are some reasonable scenarios where the Broncos are going to be on the clock there at 9, and they're going to have the option to take one of those quarterbacks. The one that I like the best, and I'm not a draft Nick, I'm not like, I'm not a draft evaluator here, but the guy that I like the best is Justin Fields. I don't think I'm alone in that position. I don't think I'm going out on too many limbs to say that. And if he's there, he's the guy that I would love to see George Paton draft, to take a quarterback with his first pick as a general manager. But what if all those quarterbacks are gone? And that absolutely is possible. If the Falcons decide to take a quarterback, that will change a lot of things. We still don't know exactly what the Panthers are going to do. They obviously did that trade to get Sam Darnold, but I don't think that totally takes them out of the quarterback market. So there's still a lot of variables there. But, obviously I think I'm not alone in watching the quarterbacks and, eyeing which one could be there at 9 and which of those guys might be the best fit for Denver.
Okay, hypothetically with the 49ers, I know rumors have been Mac Jones, Justin Fields, like who knows what's going to happen, like you mentioned, but hypothetically they take Justin Fields at 3. If you're the Broncos, maybe Trey Lance is already off the board, and maybe Mac Jones is the only quarterback available at 9. Would you take Mac Jones in that position, or do you think there's a better player available for the Broncos at that point?
Yeah, I get why Shanahan is so connected, why Kyle Shanahan is so connected to Mac Jones, because he sees them as this really cerebral quarterback who's going to be a really good fit for specifically what they do. I'm not sure if he would necessarily be the best fit for the Broncos and who the Broncos are right now. And it was really interesting to hear George Paton in his pre-draft press conference on Thursday talking about that one of the things that they have to be careful about is if you're going to bring in a quarterback, if you're going to draft one, you're going to sign one, you have to be sure that he's going to be better than the guy that you already have in the building. And I'm not sure if Mac Jones is any better than Drew Lock. I think they're very different. And I think that the things that Mac Jones has excelled at in college are, maybe some of the things that Drew Lock is still trying to work on and needs to improve on to become, a really good starter, even a consistent starter in the NFL. But I do think Drew has some of those other things, the athletic traits that Mac Jones is lacking. So if it's Mac Jones or best player at another position, a tackle, maybe a defensive player, Micah Parsons is a guy who's been mocked to the Broncos a lot, who makes sense, who might be, just kind of the best all-around linebacker in this class. And that's clearly a position of need for the Broncos. I think that's the way that that Paton would need to go. Or, that's when you consider trading back and trying to pick up a few more picks.
Yeah, George Paton did say during that pre-draft press conference on Thursday that, he likes the Broncos offensive line, but could use some depth and competition there too. You mentioned maybe a tackle in the first round. Are there any guys that stand out to you, Lindsay, that you think we could draft?
Yeah, well, I think Penny Sewell is going to be gone by there. I think that it makes a lot of sense that he, I want him to go to Cincinnati at 5. It broke my heart to watch Joe Burrow just get hit over and over and over again last year. And I think, the long-term
idea is nice, but come on, protect the guy.
Yeah, you gotta protect that guy. They can't let that continue to happen to him.
Yeah.
They just can't. So I think Sewell is kind of a slam dunk pick there for the Bengals at 5. So maybe it's Jenkins, from Northwestern. I think Garrett Bowles made such a tremendous leap last year. He's one of the best stories to come out of the Broncos last year in a year that was, kind of difficult in a lot of ways. So they feel like they have that left tackle spot fixed, but right tackle continues to be a problem. We still don't know what exactly Ja'Wuan James is going to bring. I mean, he's been an unknown ever since he signed that massive contract a couple of years ago. I mean, I've been covering this team a really, really long time, and I'm trying to remember the last time that right tackle was just set. I mean, it's been miss after miss after miss for whatever reason, injuries, guys just haven't played well, they haven't worked out. And if you could have two bookend tackles there, I think you do that. And, it's Bulls, maybe Ja'Wuan James gets another year, and then you have a rookie to develop, and then he becomes, your long-term bookend there opposite of Garrett Bowles.
Yeah, Lindsay, you mentioned Penn State linebacker Michael Parsons earlier. A lot of experts that said that given the depth at linebacker in this year's draft and the need for a new era inside linebacker here in Denver, that he might be a good option. But what about some other defensive positions? What do you think about adding a corner or a safety?
Yeah, I mean, I think, all of the early mock drafts when we were talking February, early March, it was cornerback heavy, right? I mean, and this is a really strong cornerback draft class. And so it was, Surtain and Horn and all of those guys that you were thinking about that could be fits here. It isn't as much of a position of need now anymore. And I could see some of those other defensive positions, the defensive back ones specifically, being an option if they decide to trade back. I'm not sure if number 9 is the spot right now to take a defensive back, given the investment that they've already made in free agency and these veteran players, specifically at cornerback. But I think that's something that would make a lot of sense later in the first round and the second round of some of these positions that they have to address. I mean, I think safety is still, a really big question mark, but at number 9, I don't think that's the direction that they will go or that they should go.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about these later rounds then. Who are some of the guys, or what are maybe some of the positions you think the Broncos can find, really good value in those later rounds?
Yeah, I mean, I think we kind of already hit on a couple of those positions, and in the offensive line, and Peyton wasn't lying when he said that they need to get better on the offensive line and they need to get a lot more offensive line depth. And when you look at the teams that are good year in and year out, it's teams that have really good, really strong offensive lines and really good depth at their offensive line. And this is a strong offensive line group. I think there's a lot of depth there that typically you don't necessarily see in drafts. This just happens to be a really strong offensive line class. So whether that's interior linemen, they've addressed some of those needs for immediate starters in recent years, obviously with Lloyd Cushenberry at center last year, Dalton Reisner 2 years ago, kind of a really slam dunk pick there at guard where he's going to be an anchor there on the offensive line. Hopefully we see him signing multiple contracts in Denver and he's able to, kind of really be a fixture in the Denver community for a long time there. But, I think, if they don't address a tackle early, that's absolutely something that they need to do, probably on that second day of the draft in the second or the third round. And I still think, they've invested so much in wide receiver over the last couple of years. But, when you get beyond kind of the top guys, when you get beyond Jerry Jeudy and Courtland Sutton, I still think there's a lot of room to improve that group. And what we've seen, the trend in the NFL has been you can get tremendous value and find really, really good receivers outside of the first round. And yes, this might be a historic type of wide receiver class in terms of what we're looking at in the first round. But in terms of guys that could be your third, fourth, fifth receiver, guys that are going to be really good special teams contributors, I think that's another position that they should just continue to look at upgrading. And they've made some really nice progress there over John Elway's, I think, last 2 drafts. But I think there's a lot of room to, just get better at such an important position.
I think we actually saw the value of that number 3 guy with Tim Patrick this last year. So it's always a good position to invest in for sure.
And I love Tim Patrick. I'm not trying to replace Tim Patrick or anything here, but
we all love Tim Patrick. He's the best. Well, Lindsay, we cannot thank you enough for joining us on the Snap this week and providing such amazing insight. You are the absolute best. Thank you.
Thank you guys so much for having me.
Well, that'll do it for this week's episode of The Snap. Thank you all for tuning into this episode, and another big thank you to Cynthia and Lindsay for being this week's guests. There won't be an episode next Friday with the draft starting on Thursday night, but make sure to tune into our draft coverage. We're going to have shows on Thursday and Friday starting an hour before the draft on all the Broncos social media channels. It'll be hosted by the one and only Alexis Perry and Matt Boyer, with appearances by me and Phil Milani, along with players and other special guests. You guys won't want to miss it. It's going to be a blast.